The auction bell clanged once, sharp as a rifle crack, and the crowd turned. Dust rolled between boots and hooves, swirling around the wooden platform where she stood. Her wrists were bound in front of her with frayed hemp rope. The sun beat down so hard it burned the tears before they fell. A man in a sweat-stained hat barked out, "She can't cook worth a damn, and she's too weak for field work. Ain't fit for nothing but talking up space." Laughter rippled through the men. Her father spat into the dirt beside her bare foot. "You heard him. She's useless. But a body can make use of something that breathes. Start the bidding." She looked at him once, her own blood, his eyes empty as a dried well. Her breath hitched, but she made no sound. The rope bit into her skin as she clenched her hands. A merchant offered $2 just to watch her shame. A rancher, thick-necked and cruel-eyed, leaned back against a post and smirked. "Not worth feet in," he said, "but I'll take her for one." The bellman laughed, turning slow to the crowd. $1. Who'll do better? The wind came hard down the street, slamming a shutter, stirring the smell of sweat, whiskey, and horses. Somewhere, a baby cried. Somewhere, a dog barked, chained too long. And then the murmur broke. A man stood at the edge of the crowd, tall, coat dusty from travel, shadowed beneath the brim of a battered hat. He said nothing, just watched. The crowd parted like brush before a storm. He moved slow, deliberate, boots striking hard on the planks. The closer he came, the quieter it got, until the only sound left was the creak of the gallows beam above and the rasp of her breath. The bellman swallowed. "You fixin' to bid, stranger?" The man didn't answer. He reached into his coat and laid down $5 silver, stacked, gleaming in the grit. The bellman's jaw dropped. "5? Hell, mister, she ain't worth." The man's eyes lifted then, calm and cold as winter river water. Whatever he carried behind them made the words die in the bellman's throat. No one else spoke. He turned to her. "Can you walk?" She hesitated, then nodded once. "Untie her," he said. The bellman looked to her father. "Well." Her father snorted, pocketed the coins, and shrugged. "She's yours now." The rope came loose. Blood rushed back in her hands, stinging like hornets. She stumbled down from the platform. The man caught her elbow, steady, not rough, and guided her through the staring faces toward a waiting horse. The onlookers whispered, "Madman, hermit, ghost come down from the mountain." He swung up into the saddle, then looked down at her. "Ride." She climbed up behind him, her fingers trembling as they found the edge of his coat. They rode out under the noonday sun, through dust that turned the world to gold and shadow. No one followed. For hours, the only sound was the horse's hooves on hard pan and the wind cutting through scrub. Her lips cracked from thirst. Once she tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. At dusk, the land rose. Hills lifted out of the plains like the backs of old gods. The man led them toward a narrow canyon, where the air grew cooler and pine needles carpeted the ground. He built a fire without a word. She sat across from him, watching the sparks lift into the night. He poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. She stared at it, then at him. Why'd you buy me?" He didn't look up. "Didn't buy you." She frowned, voice shaking. "Then what did you do?" He fed another stick into the fire. "Stopped to trade." The flames flared, painting his face in amber and shadow. There were scars there, pale and old. One along the jaw, another across his temple. His eyes were set deep, the color of cold earth. She lowered the cup, whispering, "They said I was useless." He poked the fire, sending a shower of sparks into the dark. "They said a lot of things about me, too." The silence after that was thick. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. When she woke at dawn, he was already saddling the horse. "Eat," he said, tossing her a piece of jerky. They rode higher that day, into the mountains where the sky pressed down close enough to touch. She watched the plains shrink behind them, her old life dissolving into the horizon. By midday, she couldn't stand it anymore. "Where you taking me?" He didn't turn his head. "Home. Yours." He nodded once. "What?" He rode a while before answering. "Because no one else saw you." The words hung there between them, strange and heavy. She didn't understand them, not yet. But the way he said them, quiet, final, made her stop asking. When night fell again, they reached a ridge that overlooked a valley so deep it seemed to swallow the stars. Smoke drifted from a small chimney below, lonely light against the endless dark. He dismounted, offered her a hand down. The ground was cold under her bare feet. The cabin's door creaked open as he pushed it. Inside, a rough bed, a table, a stove, a window facing the moon. She stepped in slow, eyes wide. He set his rifle against the wall, then turned to her. "You'll sleep there," he said, nodding to the bed. She hesitated. "And you?" "I'll keep watch." He stepped outside, shutting the door behind him. For a long time, she stood in the middle of the room, staring at the firelight crawling across the floorboards. She touched the wood of the bed frame, smooth where hands had carved it, scarred where an axe had slipped. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd ever been given. Outside, she could hear him pacing slow, boot steps steady in the gravel. Not guarding her, guarding something else. She lay down, the blanket rough but warm. The stars through the window were sharp and close, like they'd fallen just for her. Her last thought before sleep took her was of his words again, because no one else saw you. And for the first time in her life, she hoped that maybe he had. Snow came early that year, thick, heavy flakes that swallowed sound and buried trails faster than a man could blink. The axe struck the stump with a dull crack, wood splitting clean. He swung again, breath fogging in the frozen air. She caught the log before it rolled away, stacking it by the door where frost crept up the walls like ivy. Her hands were raw, fingers stiff and red. "Careful," he said without looking up. "I can manage," she answered, breath sharp, lifting another piece. The words came quicker now, the silence between them smaller than before. He paused only long enough to glance at her, face half hidden beneath a wool scarf, hair pulled back, eyes fixed on her work. He said nothing more. The wind shifted. Wolves cried somewhere below the ridge, faint but close enough to raise the hairs on her arms. He dropped the last log beside the pile, straightened, and listened. "They're hunting low this winter," he muttered. "Do they come close? If they're hungry." He turned toward the cabin, pushing the door open. The scent of pine pitch and smoke met them. Inside, the fire glowed low, throwing amber light across the rough-hewn walls. She knelt beside the stove, feeding the fire, her movements practiced now, quiet sure. The kettle hissed. He hung his coat on a peg, the fabric stiff with frost, then sat at the table where a worn journal lay open. She'd seen him write in it some nights, his face unreadable. She poured water into 2 tin cups and slid one toward him. "You don't sleep much," she said. "Enough. Not from what I hear." He lifted his eyes. "And what do you hear? You talk in your sleep?" she said softly. "Names. Places." The cup paused halfway to his lips. Steam curled between them like a ghost. "Sometimes you cry," she added. He set the cup down, the sound soft but final. "You shouldn't listen." "I don't mean to." He turned away, jaw tight. For a moment, only the crackle of the fire spoke. She lowered her gaze. "I found something," she whispered, "in the trunk under the bed." His head snapped around. "What did you find?" "A medal. And a letter." Silence dropped heavy as snow. He stood, slow and deliberate, and walked to the window. The mountain wind howled outside, shaking the shutters. "That was a long time ago." She rose too, voice trembling. "They said you were a deserter." He didn't move. "They said worse than that." She took a step closer. "Is it true?" He turned, and the fire caught the scar along his jaw. "Does it matter?" She wanted to say yes. Wanted to ask what sin he carried that kept him from sleep. But his eyes, tired, far away, stopped her. Instead, she said quietly, "You built this place with your own hands. That matters." He watched her for a long moment before sitting again, slower this time. "You ever build something before?" She shook her head. "Never had the chance." He pushed the journal toward her. "Then start here." Her brow furrowed. "What should I write?" "Anything that proves you lived." The journal's pages were rough, smelling faintly of smoke and leather. She ran her fingers over them, then began to write in careful strokes. "The snow hasn't stopped in 5 days, but I'm not cold anymore." Outside, the wolves cried again, distant now. By the time the fire burned low, she'd filled 3 pages. He'd fallen asleep in the chair, head bowed, hands folded over the rifle in his lap. She rose quietly, took a blanket from the bed, and draped it over his shoulders. His breath came slow, steady. For the first time, he looked almost peaceful. The storm eased by morning. A soft white light poured through the cracks in the shutters. She stepped outside, boots crunching in the snow. The mountains glowed pink and gold, clouds hanging low like ribbons of smoke. She felt small against the vastness, but not lost. Behind her, the cabin door creaked open. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep." She turned, smiling faintly. Too quiet. He joined her at the edge of the ridge, gazing out over the endless wilderness. "That's the way I like it. I used to think quiet meant lonely. And now—" She looked toward the cabin, smoke rising steady from the chimney. "Now it feels like peace." He studied her face, the faint color returning to her cheeks. "You changed since you came here. Maybe I just stopped being afraid." He nodded once, approving. Fear's what breaks most folks. The sun climbed higher, warming their faces. Below, the valley shimmered with snow melt and light. Later that day, he showed her how to set a snare, how to read the wind, how to listen for the creak of ice before it gave way. Her hands grew surer, her voice stronger. She laughed once, quiet, startled by the sound, and he almost smiled. When evening came, she cooked the rabbit they'd caught, the scent filling the cabin. He ate without a word, but when she looked up, he was watching her, something unspoken in his eyes. After dinner, she sat near the fire, mending his coat. Her fingers brushed a tear in the lining, and she felt something hard sewn into it. She drew it out, a small brass tag, bent and tarnished. Stamped letters, E. Gray, 12 CV. He looked up at once. "I wasn't prying," she said quickly. "I know." He took it from her, turning it over in his hand. "Used to mean something," he murmured. "What's it mean now?" He hesitated. "Reminds me not to forget." The fire popped, sparks leaping up the chimney. She studied him in the flickering light. The lines etched deep, the weight carried quiet but heavy. "You could start over," she said. "Out here, no one would know." He shook his head. "A man can't run for what he's done. He can only make something better before it find him again." She thought about that long after he went to bed. His words settled in her chest like a seed taking root. When dawn came, she stepped outside again. The valley below was veiled in mist, the world hushed and endless. She breathed deep, the air sharp and clean, and whispered into the cold, "I'm not useless." Behind her from inside the cabin, she heard his voice low, steady. "No, you're not." He was standing in the doorway, watching her with something like pride. The wind caught her hair, the sun breaking through the clouds, and for a brief, fleeting moment, the mountain looked alive, like it had been waiting for them both. And from that day forward, she worked beside him, not as a burden, but as the other half of a life he never thought he'd build again. The horses came hard up the canyon road, hooves pounding against stone, echoing through the valley like war drums. She froze by the stream, the water pail tipping in her hand. The sound grew clearer, 5 riders, maybe 6. Dust rose against the pale sky, moving fast. She turned and ran. By the time she reached the cabin, Elias was already outside, rifle slung across his shoulder, face hard as cut granite. "You saw him?" She nodded, breath ragged. "Riders, heading straight this way." He stepped past her, scanning the ridge through the glare. "They found me, then." "Who?" "Men who think ghosts pay bounties." He moved with purpose, checking rounds, cinching the horse, loading his second rifle. The air felt thinner, sharper, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. She grabbed his arm. "Elias, tell me what's coming." "Trouble that's been following me since before you were born." He pushed her toward the door. "Pack what you need. You'll ride north, keep to the timberline. Don't stop till the river." She didn't move. "You think I'm leaving you?" "I know you are." Her eyes burned. "You bought me from a rope and called me wife. You think I'm running now?" He stared at her, saw something there he hadn't before. Not fear, fire. The wind shifted. Far down the trail, the glint of sunlight on metal, rifles. "Inside," he said. She went in, but not to hide. The rifle he'd taught her to load hung above the hearth. Her hands didn't shake when she took it down. Elias caught her through the doorway, voice low. You so much as breathe wrong, they'll kill you. Then I'll breathe right, she said, setting her jaw. A faint smile, almost sorrowful, touched his lips. You're something else. The riders came into view. 5 men, dust-caked and mean, led by one with a black coat and silver badge dulled by time. They stopped 100 yards out. The leader cupped his hands and shouted, Elias Gray, you got a price on your head big enough to feed a town. Elias stepped into the open, rifle leveled. You best be sure you're hungry enough to earn it. The man laughed, voice echoing off the cliffs. Heard you turned hermit. Took a wife. Ain't that sweet? She know what kind of man you are. Elias didn't answer. The leader's grin widened. Deserter. Butcher. Shot your own captain, didn't you? A flicker of pain crossed Elias's face, gone as quick as breath. He called back. You tell that story how they wrote it, or how it happened. The man's eyes narrowed. Makes no difference. He raised his hand. The others fanned out. Elias took cover behind a pine, the first shot cracking the silence apart. Splinters burst from the trunk. Smoke filled the air. Inside the cabin, she crouched by the window, heart hammering, watching him move, calm, precise, firing once, twice, then shifting position. She saw one rider fall, another reel back, clutching his shoulder. But they kept coming. She remembered his lessons: breath, aim, don't think, just see. She steadied the barrel against the sill, sighted down the ridge, and pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed her shoulder, smoke filling the room. A man screamed. Outside, Elias turned, surprise flashing in his eyes, then nodded once before rolling behind a boulder as bullets chewed through the bark above him. She reloaded. Her hands were steady. The gunfire stretched into minutes that felt like years. Then a pause, silence except for the whistle of wind through the canyon. Elias stepped out from behind the rock. You're done, he shouted. The leader spat into the dirt. You think this ends when you kill us? Elias's jaw clenched. It ends when truth does. He fired. The man dropped, but the echo hadn't faded when another shot rang out from behind a fallen horse. Elias staggered. She screamed his name. He fell to one knee, then another, clutching his side. The snow around him turned dark. She ran from the cabin, bullets whining past her. The last gunman was reloading when she reached him. She swung the rifle like an axe, the stock splitting his jaw, the man dropping where he stood. The mountain went quiet again. She fell beside Elias, catching his head in her lap. His breath came shallow, lips pale. Don't you dare, she whispered, pressing her hand to the wound. Don't you dare. He smiled faintly. You shoot better than I thought. Save your strength. Too late for that. She shook her head, tears streaking through soot. No, you. He gripped her wrist weakly. Listen, there's a letter in the trunk. Says what they never let me tell. Give it to the marshal in 3 Pines. He'll know. She nodded, sobbing. I will. I promise. He blinked slow, eyes finding hers. They called you useless. She bent closer, trembling. They were wrong. His breath left him then, quiet as the falling snow. She held him until the light faded from the sky, the wind carrying the last gunshots echo down the valley. When she finally stood, her dress was stiff with blood. She walked to the ridge, staring down at the trail below, the riders' bodies scattered, the snow already claiming them. The sun broke through the clouds, washing the canyon in gold. She went back to the cabin, hands numb, eyes hollow. She took the shovel from beside the door and began to dig in the frozen earth beneath the tallest pine. Each strike echoed like thunder, each breath fogging in the cold. By the time she finished, the stars had come out. She laid him down gentle, crossed his arms, and whispered, You're free now. The wolves howled again, closer this time, but none dared come near. She stood a long while, her shadow thin against the snow, until dawn touched the peaks. Then she carved his name into a wooden cross, only one word beneath it, redeemed. And when the first light hit that marker, she lifted her face to it and whispered, You paid it all back. The wind carried her words across the valley, through the trees, over the mountains. And somewhere, in the stillness, it sounded like an answer. The fire cracked in the old man's hands as he fed it another branch. Sparks rose into the black like tiny souls, carried off by the mountain wind. The travelers leaned closer, faces half-lit, half-shadow. One of them, a boy no older than 20, broke the silence. "You telling me that's true? That she stayed up here alone after he died?" The old man's eyes narrowed under the brim of his hat. "You think a woman like that needed company?" The wind moaned through the pines outside the cabin, the sound soft as weeping. Inside, the firelight flickered across rough log walls and a single carving over the mantel. E. Gray, redeemed. He poked the coals, sending up a shower of sparks. Folks came looking for her first few years. Bounty men mostly. Some said they wanted the gold Elias Gray stole. Some said they just wanted to see if the story was real. He spat into the flames. Not one of them ever stayed long. The boy frowned. What did they find? The old man's gaze drifted to the window, where snow pressed thick against the glass. A woman with eyes like iron. Cabin built solid as prayer. And a grave that made even killers go quiet. He leaned back, the firelight catching the lines carved deep in his face. She never left that ridge. Never went back down to the towns that sold her. They say she buried him with her own hands, then started talking and whoever the world threw away. Orphans, drifters, runaways. Fed him, Tom, sent him on their way better than they came. The youngest traveler shifted, voice low. Did you ever talk about him? Only once. The old man's voice rasped like dry leaves. To a preacher who came up here thinking he could save her soul. She told him, "My soul was saved by a man who never went to church." Then she shut the door. A faint smile touched his lips. Preacher didn't come back. The fire flared as the wind howled outside. Years passed in the story silence. The cabin stood through storm and fire, through winters that froze the river to glass. Travelers still found it sometimes, smoke rising from the chimney, smell of stew in the air, and her standing in the doorway with her rifle and her quiet eyes. They called her the Mountain Bride. The old man shifted, bones creaking, gazed distant as if he could still see her. One spring, a soldier came up the trail. Gray coat. Said he'd served under Elias once. Carried papers, proof that the old man hadn't been no deserter. Truth was, he tried to stop the massacre his captain ordered. Got shot for it, left to die. Only reason the lies stuck was 'cause the ones who knew were buried with him. The travelers leaned closer. The old man's voice softened. That soldier gave her the papers. She didn't cry, didn't say a word, just took him, walked to the grave, and laid him down. Then she said, "Already knew." Silence filled the room, heavy as snow. Outside, a wolf called from the ridge. The echo rolled long and lonely through the trees. The boy broke the quiet again. What happened to her? The old man's eyes flicked toward the fire, where the logs had burned down to embers. One night, storm came in from the north. Coldest I ever seen. When it passed, the cabin was buried near to the roof. Took a week for anyone to reach it. He stared into the flame. They found her sitting by the hearth, hands folded, fire still burning. Looked like she'd just closed her eyes. No struggle, no fear. The boy swallowed. She died there. She stayed there. The old man corrected softly. Same way he did. Same way the mountain keeps them both. The wind hit the walls then, a deep, low groan that made the travelers glance toward the door. The firelight flickered, throwing shadows that seemed to move on their own. "You ever go up there?" one asked. The old man smiled without showing his teeth. "Once. Long time ago. Snow melted early that year. I found the cabin half swallowed by pine and moss, but still stood. Inside was quiet as church. Dust thick but the bed made, and a little book on the table. Pages near crumbled from age. What was in it?" He took something from his coat pocket, an old, leather-bound notebook, corners worn smooth. He placed it on the table, the travelers leaning in. The first page was still legible. The old man's finger traced the words as he read aloud. "The snow hasn't stopped in 5 days, but I'm not cold anymore." He closed it gently. That was her hand. For a long moment, no one spoke. The fire hissed softly, melting a bit of frost that crept down the walls. Finally, the boy asked, "So you believe it happened?" "All of it." The old man looked up, eyes glinting beneath his hat brim. "Son, out here, Truth don't matter half as much as what stays. In that story, he gestured toward the ridge beyond the window, where a single plume of smoke curled faint against the stars. That story's been staying longer than any of us. He leaned forward, voice low, almost reverent. They called her useless, but she built a life from the bones of her own ruin. Took a man the world condemned and turned him into something holy. That's why the mountain still keeps her name. The boy swallowed, eyes wide. You think she could still be seen? The old man smiled faintly, gazed distant. Some nights, when the snow comes quiet, folks say they see a light up there. Cabin windows glowing. Smoke in the wind. A woman's voice humming low. Maybe it's her. Maybe it's the mountain remembering. He looked each of them in the eye. All I know is this. If you hear that song, you don't follow it. You just listen. Some stories ain't meant to be found again. The fire cracked one last time, flaring bright before settling into coals. Outside, the wind eased, the night gone still as sleep. The old man tipped his hat low, voice almost a whisper. Elias Gray and his bride, they didn't die. They just became the kind of truth this land don't forget. And as the travelers rose to leave, the last thing they heard was the mountain wind curling through the door. Soft, steady, carrying a sound that might have been a hymn or might have been her voice, still calling him home.